Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 16th Margaret Horn Debate, which was set up, as it says on the tin, 16 years ago, when people thought I was mad to do such a thing. And it's gone from strength to strength. And it's our annual opportunity to have a debate about something that's either concerning us or of interest to us. We used to do it on Social Enterprise Day, but it's now sort of Social Enterprise Month, so it's better that we pick a day where we can have time and to enjoy the debate and to get your input. My name is June O'Sullivan and I run the London Early Years Foundation, and today I am very pleased that I am simply on the panel and that the whole day and event is going to be managed very capably by Meredith. Meredith Jones-Russell is going to chair the event and hold us all to account and make sure that she gets all your input and your feedback and keeps an eye on what's going on. So I'm going to hand over to Meredith with a great big thanks for her agreeing to do this. And after that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yeah, as June said, welcome to LEYF's 16th annual Margaret Horn Debate, which gives us a really unique opportunity to debate ideas and policy and practice, and hopefully we'll create a space for open, honest discussion of some of the most pressing issues facing the early years sector. I'm Meredith Jones-Russell, and I've been covering the early years as a journalist for over a decade now, predominantly for Nursery World magazine, and I also have 2 children under 3, so this the topic of today's debate is particularly interesting to me professionally and personally, and the question that we're going to be discussing today is nursery the best place for a child, which seems particularly relevant in the current economic climate, with families facing a squeeze on their resources, and accessible, affordable childcare needed more than ever to get them back into the job market and prop up the economy, also help their own finances grow, but with nurseries continuing to face huge financial pressure and funding rates unchanged since 2016. So here to discuss this and many more things, I suspect we have 5 expert panelists. It's my pleasure to introduce to you now. We have Owen Thomas, who is Managing Director and Head of Programmes at Fathers at charity Future Men. Norma Raynes, Chief Executive of the charity From Generation to Generation. Mark James, Quality Assurance and Registration Lead at childminder agency Tiny. June O'Sullivan, Chief Executive of LEYF, London Early Years Foundation, and Sian Aiken, Customer Liaison Specialist at the Early Years Foundation and a parent herself. The debate today will begin with all of our panelists in turn giving their responses to the debate question, and then we'll open up the floor to you. So please do pop your questions into the Q&A chat function at the bottom as we go, and we'll endeavour to pose as many of your questions to our panel as we can. Today's event will be recorded and made available online after the session, and if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas that you'd like to keep the conversation going with after the event, then please do contact June on Twitter. Her handle is @JuneO'Sullivan. One word. So without further ado, let me hand over to our panel. I'll ask Owen to kick us off. So Owen, is nursery the best place for a child?
Thanks very much, Meredith, and thanks to June and everyone at LEYF for inviting me along today, and to my fellow panelists joining us. It's interesting that I would be asked to start today, given that some of the points that I want to reflect on reflect, I suppose, the changing roles of men and women and parents as dual carers in society. You know, I also don't want to sound as though I enjoy having kind of shards of wood in my posterior, but the nuance after that is it depends. Obviously, depending on the circumstances of the individual family and the individual support networks that surround the child, nursery may well be the best place for them to be, but when that should be is the question that I think is more poignant. And when a family decides together that their child should require a nursery place, quality, relevant, accessible, fairly priced nursery provision, and free at point of access, actually, more to the point, should be available within easy reach of all families living in the London area, I think, in such a densely populated area. I mean, I've been brought here today specifically to talk about it from a dad's perspective, because we run programs. The charity I run at the moment runs different types of interventions and provisions with men and boys across their life course, and particularly the area that interests me is supporting fathers. So for us, that work starts antenatally, as early as possible during pregnancy. And we really want to bring about changes in the way that men are supported and informed and educated about how important their role as a parent is to the development of their child. You know, life for us all has changed massively over the last few years because of immediate things like the pandemic and because of the economic challenges we're all facing at the moment. But moreover, over the last generation or so, 20 or 30 years, the gender roles of men and women, particularly around parenting and around the workplace, massively shifted, and rightly so, to bring about a more equitable and fair society where both men and women are no longer defined by old-fashioned tropes and stereotypes about what it is to be a man or a woman and what particular behaviours you should conform to. And I think from the work we've done, and I've been in this charity for over 15 years, supporting young dads, expectant dads, men with complex needs and whose children are known to statutory services, and men from minority ethnic backgrounds as well. Increasingly, men are saying to me they want to be more involved in the lives of their children, and they want to have more of a say in what happens with their children, regardless of the relationship status between them and the child's mother. However, the systems that govern people's access to provision around their children, whether that be the early years or later, don't seem to be moving in step with what families are demanding themselves. And the structures and the guidance that exist around this are lax, basically. You know, good nursery provision with all of the kind of sometimes wrap around additional support and support for parents and information and signposting, guidance that can be there, as well as tips about how to manage your child when they're away from nursery, about your child's development that you may get from, really professional and caring nursery staff, are key, both to mothers and fathers, an inclusive space. Fathers are increasingly, from our research, playing a role in pick up and drop of children from school and from nursery settings. Workplace mums are going back into work earlier now, and so men are taking on more of, slowly changing, but it is changing, taking more of some of those responsibilities and having a say and being interested in the decisions around this, and no longer leaving this as something that mums take care of. So having that space being one that's accessible, one that reflects the communities that are coming there, whether that be diversity of staff, in the racial or cultural background, but also in terms of the gender dynamic. And I know LEYF have done amazing work over the years to try and get more men and young men into childcare over the years. Is really important. This is a social justice issue for me. Many of the men and their families that we support are from socioeconomic groups where things are not easy and they don't have the potential to go out and source a paid-for place in a nursery. So often are relying on funded places, which, as Meredith mentioned at the beginning, have seen massive cuts over the last 5 or 6 years. And that has set back these families massively, in my opinion, over the years I've been doing this work. The ability to get back into the workplace, to get back into education and training, to re-establish your social links after a year or 2 away having a child as a mother, if you've been fortunate enough to have that time off, or even as a father who may be struggling with jobs in the gig economy, with 0 hours contracts, good, reliable, accessible nursery care, which you can trust is looking out for the best developmental needs and interests of your child, as well as the wider needs of the community, is really, really key and important. One thing I was asked, and please do wrap me up, Meredith, when I'm going on too long, was what do dads think about this? And I think whilst I can kind of anecdotally talk about our experience of the living experiences, one thing we need to do is ask dads more what they think. I'd be interested to hear what those who work in the nursery sector feel about, if they're seeing more men in their provision, and how do they think we can engage better with men in those spaces. We do a lot of work with professional services, social care, early help, people like that sometimes co-located where there are nurseries. But trying to kind of, what families want is one point of entry. They don't want 27 services, having to explain their story over and over again. They want to know that if I turn up at a council nursery or a local authority or a family hub or children's centre, those that still exist, that the provision there will be wraparound, and the people that I meet there are trustworthy, reliable, and regularly available to me and my child. They're going to be able to share with me the key information, regardless of, you know, what's happening in my personal circumstance, regardless of whether I'm mother or father. I want to feel as though I'm welcome and that my views matter and that people have got time to speak to me about my child. I think that's really important, you know, and good nursery provision is already doing that. You know, there are countless people in this sector who are doing great work. I meet countless professionals from the early years who really, really recognise the benefits of including men more in this space. It is a feminist issue. I was lucky enough to be invited to be at the Forces Society a couple of weekends ago, talking about equality starting at home, and the different roles that men and women play in the domestic situation, and how we need to encourage and support men from as early as possible, pre-becoming a dad, even in terms of education for men and boys in schools about what you aspire to be growing up when you get older. And a parent, becoming a parent, for me, is the biggest job you're ever going to take on in life, whatever your profession is. Becoming a parent is the zenith of all responsibility. So training boys and men, promoting an inclusive space for parenting, both in the media and in statutory sector, and particularly in nursery times, where this sector sets the agenda moving forward for a child's education for the next 15, 18 years. We know that their chances of educational success are boosted by a good nursery education. And dads tell us time and time again, what I care about is good outcomes for my children. And dads is now starting to understand, and we do a massive job in trying to push to them that a good nursery and engaging well in the early years is really important for that outcome. So hopefully that's a good framing to start with.
Lovely, thank you very much. I will hand over to Norma now, if possible. Norma, what are your thoughts, picking up on any of that, or just your own thoughts, please, on the question?
Well, thank you, Meredith. First of all, I'd just like to say how pleased I am to be here, and to thank June especially for inviting me. There are some very amazing similarities in what I had thought about, and perhaps not amazing, with some of the observations Owen's made. But what I'd like to do to begin with is say something.
Oh, Norma, you're just on mute.
Is that better now?
Better.
Right. Okay. So I just want to begin by saying something and then asking some questions about what I'm going to say, if that's all right. And then I'll make some observations about grandparents quite happily, actually, which again, I think has some resonance in what Owen's already said about men. It's amazing, really, and very pleasing too. So let me begin by saying that in the best of all possible worlds, the best place for a child, it could be argued, is at home with a happy mother and or father, surrounded by a happy and supportive community in which there are places where a child can learn to grow and develop emotionally, socially, and physically. So that is a community in which there are places like parks, there are swimming pools, there are opportunities for children and fathers or mothers to meet other fathers or mothers at little locally provided mothers, fathers, and babies and toddlers groups, etc. But you know, and I know, that what I've just described to you is a totally idealized world. It's not part of anybody's life for the most part. And I think we need to be asking some really important questions now, because now more than ever, we are going to need good quality childcare to support parents and their children as we go through these really difficult times together, I think. So the first thing is to ask the question, what does it mean to be a happy parent? And are parents happy at home all day, every day with their babies or children in the early years world? What do we know about what this means to parents? We've got some evidence that's from recent work, but what do we know? We must ask that question. What can a parent, mothers or fathers, provide in the way of opportunities? What have they got available? What can they reach out to in their own immediate domestic environment? What can they reach out to in their own neighborhoods? What is there for them to help stimulate the development of the child who's now an important part of their family. And then I think we need to seriously look at the economic implications. Why do parents go out to work? Is it really of necessity to put food on the table? Is it really of necessity? Is it of choice? Is it about personal growth and development? We need to understand better why parents go out to work, because in the best of all possible worlds, they should be at home, shouldn't they, with their children, providing all the stimulation that only apparently they can provide. What do parents know about where good provision is? How do they find out about this information? How can they possibly, when they're trying to choose the best place for their child to go, can they know that this is the best place? This is somewhere where their child will not only be happy, but be stimulated and grow and meet other children and to have the best possible opportunities for educational, emotional, and social and physical growth. What do we know about the nature of the provision as it matches or doesn't match with parental needs? What is that kind of dissonance between what there is out there in our society still and what parents really need? Are we still at a stage in which what parents are having to do is cobble everything together? Cobble a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of the other, and the bits don't even speak to each other. So the primary agent in all of this is the parent seeking the very best for their child. We need to be asking things like that all the time, I think, and not assuming that what we are providing is what parents, mothers or fathers, really need to promote the well-being of their child. There's still an awful lot to be asked, it seems to me. Just looking again at grandparents very briefly, and I have to say that I am one now of, I'm a grandparent of 4 children, all of whom are in fact 2 sets of twins. So think about the complications there for mothers and fathers. They don't all just come along in ones, you know, they seem to come along in small buses of some sort or another. And let me say, not to paint another idealized picture, of course, we all know most grandparents are absolutely thrilled when a grandchild arrives upon the scene, but that may be as much as grandparents can, on the whole, contribute. Being thrilled is not of much practical value to a parent or a small child, actually. Many grandparents still don't live around the corner, or increasingly grandparents don't live around the corner or within easy driving distance. And given the cost of petrol these days, I'm not sure the easy driving distance is of that in great importance. Very few people are in a situation where grandma or grandpa lives across the road or around the corner or even in the same town. So we need to acknowledge that when we're thinking about the role and the contribution a grandparent can play. Not all grandparents have the resources to provide what a small child needs to develop, let alone the ability to do this when they've got them, if you understand what I actually mean here. Not all of them can provide stimulating environments for small children, and not all of them have got the energy that you need to have when you're spending time all day with a small child whose curiosity and desire to learn and develop is enormous. Often, grandparents have physical disabilities, have their own personal physical problems, and can't spend all the time with the best will in the world they might want to with their children. But they're not averse, where it is possible, to becoming part of the nursery or the childcare provision. To be welcomed into that would be a major, major development and contribution of a reasonable expectation, it seems to me, of what a grandparent can do to make a contribution. So we know that June is encouraging this kind of development, but you know, that is not typical. Trying to find nurseries that are willing to encourage older people, grandparents in particular, to become part of that social provision is hard and difficult, and not frequently occurring in our current provision. It brings me to a comment I remember a colleague of mine, when she took her 1-year-old and 2.5-year-old to her father's house, where he had offered to spend a full day providing childcare. At the end of the day, when she got there just after 6 o'clock in the evening, her father ushered both the children towards her and smiling and said, "They have delighted me enough." At which point she picked up her children and took them happily, or both of them and the mum, home. But she learnt a very important lesson, and so did her father. So it seems to me, all I want to say now is that what I think we really need out there is neighbourhood nurseries, because they will provide stability, they will provide continuity, they will provide a guarantee for parents who are at the moment cobbling everything they can do, cobbling all the bits together that make it possible for them to go out to work or out to further education. And we need something there in our local communities, which is free at the point of access. I couldn't support you more, Owen, on that front. These young, small children are seriously our future. We think health ought to be free at the point of access. I can't say more firmly what I have just said. We need to have free at the point of access. That future we are growing, that really important time in the children's lives that will contribute to all our futures and not just theirs. That's all I really want to say, Meredith, at the moment.
Thank you. Fantastic. Mark, can I ask you to give us your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I remember to unmute, so that's the first challenge achieved. So I come at this with a couple of different hats. I spent the majority of my career in nurseries until about 7 months ago, and moved into childminding for a childminding agency to really support them with their quality and quality processes. So I guess if I look at the question saying, is nursery the right place for your child? I think the answer would be maybe. And it's very much about each child and whether that fits for the parent's child that they're looking at and their needs. And just because it's a sibling of a child that went to a nursery or to a childminder doesn't mean that the other sibling is going to require the same. So it's very much looking at what fits best for each child. If you were to ask me, is early education or an early education setting the right place for a child, then my answer would definitely be yes. Actually, we know the importance of high quality childcare and education. It's well documented, and it's massively a thing we're all talking about post-COVID, for the importance for children to have access to really good experiences in their early years. If we not ever forget that actually children make the biggest developmental progress in the first 5 years of their life than in any other part of their life. Referring, I think, to some of the new policy changes, where we look at kind of the grandparents stepping in to provide care, and whether or not that's a good thing. I think no one is denying that having access to multi-generational experiences and having access to grandparents is a wonderful thing. However, we have massive issues in our schooling system at the moment for children that are in primary education. There's underfunding, there's overcrowding in classrooms, and nobody is suggesting that this should be fixed by giving the responsibility back to parents. So it's very much thinking about the status that we have in early years. There's still this huge misconception about the importance that quality early years education has on children's learning. It's not just this safe care place to be. So I think we've got a lot of work to do around the status change. Now, if we look at some of the studies, actually, the SEED study, for example, it highlighted some areas where actually childminders were doing a fantastic job, and that actually in children's language and communication, sometimes childminders were actually better at being able to offer that. We also know that home-based interactions, if you look at Julie Fisher's work that looked at home-based interactions versus nursery schools or childminders, often the communication at home was deep-rooted in the child's actual interest and their questions at the time, and that actually could be more valuable than sometimes the interactions that happen in an educational setting. So we've got a lot to learn about how we can work together. But actually, I think we need to be really practical, and I share both the views of Norma and Owen in what they talked about, and very much with the ideologicalized view of society. We would love for parents and grandparents and wider families to have access to each other, but that's not the world that we are living in now. If you look at some of the stuff that was sent out prior to this, alongside the debate information, the change in the family structures that have happened over the last 100 years, and the change to how family makeups exist. So actually we need to be really honest about what we're actually supporting at the moment. And if we look at disadvantaged communities that might not have access to this wider family support circle, and also post-COVID and with the cost of living and the quite frightening situation that a lot of families find themselves in without having access to some form of early education, whether that be through access to nurseries, access to childminders, who's the one that's directing these vulnerable families to early help support and helping to make sure they've got access to food banks when they need them? You know, I really think that the early years industry is undervalued in the advocating that it does for these poor and vulnerable families and disadvantaged communities. So I would have real concern about children not existing in some form of education within a setting. Now, I've got some wonderful childminders that actually are grandparents and their grandchildren attend their childminding setting, which is wonderful. And I visited one recently and was offering some ongoing support. But actually what it means is that she's still regulated. She still adheres to the EYFS. You know, you've got these brains that are ready to learn. And actually, it's really important that we know exactly what we're doing to be able to support that learning. So I'm not against or adverse to children having lots of different ranges of settings and being with grandparents for support. But I think we need to be having a wider conversation about what that support looks like, making sure that we're not just engaging with those that are doing the setting education, but families and wider families about the importance of that home interaction as well. It's very interesting, I think, if you look at some of those quotes that actually from the Ipsos Mori study, it asked who parents felt were responsible for educating their children. And most didn't feel that it was anyone's responsibility other than them. But of those that did think that there could be support, 54% felt that the responsibility sat with schools, which is actually more than childminders, nurseries and nannies all put together, which came in at 43%. So there is still a lot of work to be done on the status of early years education, that we're still the footnote. And I think, you know, I've been beating a drum at every kind of panel that I've been talking at the last month about the need for this status raising so that we can actually see the value that the early year settings, who are the experts in child development, can actually offer. So yeah, just going back to that initial point, I do think children need access to early education, but it's very much about what works for them. One child might really need that focused, quieter support in a childminding setting. Sometimes we were having a chat before the panel formally started about, you know, whether a child that worked really well in a childminder, maybe that changes and they now need access to a nursery provision. So it's very much about the child's need, but the overarching message is I think they need to have access to something that's really considering about what works for them developmentally.
Lovely, thank you very much. Just before we move on, I'll remind you that the Q&A box is open. Please do keep your questions coming in, comments and things, and we'll be putting them to the panel in a little bit. But first of all, I will move on to June and ask you to throw your thoughts at us on the subject, please.
Thank you. I am not going to talk too much, you'll be pleased to know, because the eloquence of my panelists so far have covered all sorts of things, and I'm not going to repeat myself, and I'm very interested for us to be asking challenging questions. So I agree that we don't have a national philosophical stand or comment about what is the value of a child. We've never really done that, and I think we need that. I think we need to understand what matters. Why does a child matter in modern day UK? Scotland has an ambition to make Scotland the best place to grow up as a child. And I've never seen this happening in England, but I doubt if there's any of us who are parents or working with children in some form or shape, our grandparents are, advocates of the sector, that wouldn't want something similar. You know, why would you not want your child to have the best experience? So we need to have a national conversation that moves away from one of the problems, I think, that causes this, which is there is a confusion in people's minds about whose decision this is. You know, so is it you because you choose to have children, or is it us as a society because we're part of a community and together we actually need to do this, whether you have children or not? And the idea is, I often say, is you need people who are going to run your businesses and your organizations for you, and you need people who are going to look after you when you're in social care. So actually, everyone has a duty to that. And I think that is a frame that we've never really addressed, and I don't think people always understand it. So you always get the pushback of, well, it's not my problem, I don't have any children. Well, yeah, but you know, one day you will be old and you will need some support. The second thing is we have no then national strategy to kind of unpack some of this. So it kind of becomes like a horrible marketplace. So you have people competing. I mean, when my children were growing up, they went to childminder and nursery. And I was in charge of childminders. And so because there was a lovely balance to be had about the home environment and the working environment, which is for them, the nursery. And so I think, you know, I'm not competing with childminders, and I think that you know, are not competing with schools or playgroups. I think you need what Norma says, a whole range of community-based support that actually people can access. And so that's, you know, so is nursery the best place for your children? Well, that's the question we're being asked, but nursery maybe is a good place for some children and childminder a good place for others. We've all alluded to quality, but there is, again, lack of narrative around what we mean by quality. We bandy that word around very loosely, but we don't really always sit down and have a conversation about it. What does quality look like? What do we understand? I think Norma may have said, what do you look for when you go into a nursery? What does it mean to you? And I'm really interested in Sean's thinking on that as a parent without any background in nurseries. What does it look like? What do you understand by quality? For some parents, quality is, it looks very fancy from the outside. It's all got nice furniture when you go in, and actually, but the staff are not really harmonious and they don't really engage. And, you know, there are all sorts of myths, and they're perpetuated, I think, also by stereotypes and by the press. So I think that's the other thing. Then finally, I think we have created an economy that requires two people to work. You know, that is a fact. This is London, you know, here. And, you know, my children will be living at me till they're 90 because they can't afford to even get a deposit together. You guys are all often working in the early years. We do our best to pay everything we possibly can. We're not dividend led, so we can give you everything we have, but it's not enough. So this notion that, you know, we have created an environment of where two people have to work just to survive, and then we don't create a structure around it, an infrastructure around it to enable those parents to work, is shocking as far as I'm concerned, because why should our children carry the can for economic decisions that were made many years ago that are now part of the norm? And therefore, why are we having these ridiculous questions about, I don't have any children, so it's nothing to do with me, mate. You know, you chose to have your children, so therefore, you know, get on with it. This is a wrong conversation. And I think that until we have a bigger debate about what we believe why a child matters, what our views are and the value of a child, how we become together in that. I know this, people often use the Ubuntu model, but it, you know, it says something about the village raising a child. And I don't think, you know, London, people often are, outside of London are a bit frightened of London, but actually London is just a series of villages, you know, and many of us hardly go outside of our little bit, and we know where we are, and we get there and we spend our time kind of hanging out in that area. And you can create communities in that space, and nurseries can be catalysts for those communities, more so than maybe childminders, but they can be catalysts in a way that a childminder can join in and be part of that process. But I think fundamentally, till we have a big wake-up call conversation with ourselves about what is the value of children, what do children mean for us, and how do we understand our responsibility in an economic environment that actually requires people to be there. And the point about grandparents is absolutely correct. Only something like 5% of families in London have access to grandparents easily, whereas 95% of families in parts of Scotland have access to grandparents because of the nature of the economy. You know, if you're living in London, you tend to, we're all following that, you know, the idea, get on your bike, you know, follow the work. And therefore, as a consequence, you are in a place where you don't know other people. So we've created a whole economic system that requires two people to work, that it moves people out of their natural home base because they can't afford to buy a house or a home near their family, where actually they're not paid well enough because of the economic situation. Forget it now. Now is bad, but it's always been bad. It's not going to change. So we create that where they can't afford it. And we talk about affordable childcare. And I run LEYF, and we're having huge conversations internally as to what we can do to make it even more affordable than it is, because we recognize that even with the best of intentions as a social enterprise, we're still struggling with the notion of what is affordable. Fundamentally, we all know that this is a lack of government engagement. That is an understanding that we are beyond Cinderella in terms of the support. I think Mark made mention of that. And so therefore, but we won't change that. We won't change the allocation of spend till we as a community and as a group of people, parents, parents and non-parents, grandparents and grandparents without grandchildren. All of us have to come together, and we have to shout that actually, if we're serious about supporting our society and supporting our longevity, we need to stand up for children. And so a nursery could be a fantastic place to go there, but it has to be fantastic for them to have that experience, because that's what they're owed. They should not be the consequence of poor economic decisions.
Thank you. Sean, can I come to you and ask you from a kind of parental perspective, what you think, how important is nursery as the place for a child?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And a lot of what I will be saying does follow on from what June has just said. If you had asked me this question at the beginning of when I found out I was pregnant, I would have said the most important part, the most important place for a child to be is to be with me. But I think that was because I felt a lot of outside pressure. The idea that I was a young mum, I'm having a baby, and, this whole kind of generation of where it appears, or at least appears, that mums can do it all. And, they should do it all because, you've decided to start a family, and mums should be able to work and they should be able to look after the children. And then it did kind of get to the point where, I did have to have a serious sit down with Harrison's father, and it was a talk about the way the economy was moving, that I would have to go back to work and what that would look for, childcare wise. And then unfortunately I found myself, having Harrison during lockdown. I had been made redundant, so I didn't have a maternity package, and so then I did leave it. I left it about 10 months, and then I started to look for work again. This was after I had Harrison, and I found myself then, my relationship had broken down, and I was then a single parent. And then the job at LEYF came about, and at first I was thinking, can I do this? Can I, realistically work remotely with a toddler? And how that would look, coming into the office for 2 days, because I didn't at that stage know how affordable the nursery place would be. And then when I, had my initial interviews, and it was said that there would be a 50% staff discount, I realised I could do it. I could kickstart my career again, and I could, get back into the workplace, have those adult connections again. But then Harry would also get such a good quality education, and I did, have to ask myself, what is important for Harrison, and what is the, important start, and can I do everything, and can I give him the best at home, not giving him 100% of my attention, and I just can't. And when I did my induction, I hadn't really, looked around pedagogy, but when I was on that induction, and it was so centrally focused on the LEYF pedagogy, I realised if I was to ever choose a nursery to send Harrison, it would be a LEYF nursery, because they provide such quality, and just every aspect of that pedagogy is something that I want Harry to benefit from. What was I going to say? So I can still be close to Harrison, because he's fortunate enough to have a place in the Marsham Street nursery, which is actually just at the bottom of our office. So he's still in a close proximity to me. It's easy for us to commute in, and he gets all the benefits of the nursery. And he's been there a little over a month, and the improvements that I've seen in him is astounding already. He was very attached to myself and to his dummy, but he is very much willing to do more things independently now, not so reliant on me. Even at home, he would want to be quite close to me, but now he'll take himself off. He's quite happy to play on his own independently, and not worry that I'm not right by him. And he's less reliant on his dummy for comfort at nursery, which is so important, because that in turn has meant that his speech is improving. Socially and emotionally, he's very empathetic towards his peers. So I've heard from his teachers, he's not just attached to one teacher, he's formed very close bonds with the chef and the other teachers in the nursery as well. So he's not, you know, solely reliant on one person, which is what I wanted. I didn't want him to get attached to just one person for comfort. He's more adventurous with food. He started using cutlery, you know, all that stuff where I would love to be able to be at home and teach him all of those things. But, you know, day to day running around when I'm, you know, trying to work and I've got Teams meetings, I just can't sit down and focus on that. You know, lunchtime generally is just like picky bits. And then dinner, you know, I do get into the habit of, you know, sitting him down with cutlery. But then when I'm trying to like move the nighttime routine on, I do end up then feeding him. But he's now picking up cutlery independently because he's used to doing that at nursery. And I had to also ask myself, you know, there are activities that I'd love to do with Harrison. I'd love to do finger painting. I'd love to have a sand pit and like a, you know, do wet play with him, but I just can't. And he does all those things at nursery with his peers. And, you know, to walk past on my lunch break or during like my breaks, you know, if I have to go, you know, pop downstairs for whatever reason, to see him, you know, interacting with his peers, interacting with his teachers, myself and his dad, it just makes us so proud every day. I unfortunately wasn't able to come into the office last week, so Harrison missed out on a week of nursery and he only attends 2 days. Yesterday it was his first day back after about 2 weeks, and they said it was his best day yet. They said that they'd seen such a vast improvement in his confidence, in how he was with his peers and his teachers and his speech. They were absolutely amazed that in little over a month, it's like looking at a completely different child. And he's so much happier. I feel like he's so much happier at home because he's getting such good quality education. I think it's so important. So now if you ask me the question, is nursery the best place? I would say yes, 100%. But then not, I would say not just nursery. I would say that, you know, there needs to be some kind of push, you know, that childminders can get involved as well, or nannies can get involved, and it to create this sense of community, but to promote early years education, because I just feel like he's going to have such a strong foundation moving forward for however long he is at a LEYF nursery. It's just so, as a parent, it's made my life easier, and it's made me so proud that he is my son and how far he's come. And I couldn't, you know, speak highly enough of the staff. And that's just, you know, that's not coming from a staff member, that is genuine as a parent. The work that the teachers do downstairs, I take my hats off to them, because they have created a community. Harry's is 18 months, so he would have been in the baby room, but they put him in the toddler room, and so he's with a lot of older children, and I don't know whether that's had an impact on him as well. But there is such a community. They all get along so well, and they also have sessions with the preschoolers as well. So, you know, it is like a community, and I think it's just so important. And it's really, honestly, yeah, I'm very happy with how he's come along.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that, and thank you to all our panelists for kicking us off. I'm going to turn now to some of our questions that are coming in from people, and I think that the first one kind of picks up quite nicely on what Sian was saying there, in terms of kind of specific skills and things that children can pick up from a nursery setting. Amber's asked, do you think a nursery setting would reduce the amount of young children entering primary school who have speech and language difficulties, particularly after the pandemic? I wonder if Mark, potentially, could you maybe pick up on this?
Yeah, so we know that children having access to support around speech and language and socialisation with other children is vital to their speech development. So I think the answer I would give is that absolutely children attending nursery and having that socialisation, having access to interaction with their peers and different environments will support them in their speech and language. But I would go back actually to what Sian was saying, and I think you really hit the key there about community. And I think it's not just about nursery. I think, you know, it's about making sure that we've got access to support. Because actually we have children, lots of children in nursery at the moment that are coming through post-pandemic and are in childminding settings post-pandemic with speech and language delay, but actually getting them the support they need in early intervention is very tricky because those specialists are also underfunded. So actually trying to get a child early intervention, it's almost, God forbid, it's too early. Whereas actually we know that the earlier we can get in there and offer support is really, really vital. So yes, educational environments such as nurseries and childminders 100% have been evidenced to support children developing speech and language. But I would argue that there's more to do with that. We've got a much wider picture of challenge that we need to confront post-pandemic. And I think we've got to make sure that support happens. And it's not a simplistic response to fix a problem. It's not a sticking plaster. I think we need to really look at what support services are out there, you know, and actually if we've got children that aren't accessing nursery settings or childminding settings or coming to play groups, what can we do to engage with them? There's an amazing organisation called the Peckham Play Bus, and they have got a bus that they've recycled and they take into communities in Peckham that don't access any of the services. And they do this amazing work to actually access the children that don't have any of this support. And they have speech and language therapists attending as well. So I think, you know, I would love to say that we're going to get support from the government to get this done, but I can't guarantee that we will, and I don't have confidence that we will. So I do think that there would be a great way for us to unite. Sometimes we pitch different parts of early years against each other, and that includes parents, wider family members, that includes children's centres and childminders and nurseries and school nurseries. We have this kind of pecking order. And I think actually if we're going to achieve change, I think we all need to come together and think about that child at the centre and what they need and make sure that this is available no matter what situation they find themselves in, because I do think it's a simplistic response to just put a child into a nursery, because actually if they're in a nursery that isn't good quality, that's not going to be making an impact. And we know that children in the most disadvantaged communities in the UK are usually the ones experiencing the poorest quality of childcare. So actually it's a bigger answer than that. I wish I could give a simple one, but I know that's why we're here. But I do think we've all got to come together to actually see how we're going to affect that change, rather than continuing to do sticking plasters, which I think is what we've done for a very long time.
June, did you have anything to add to that? I thought you.
No, I think Mark is completely eloquent on this whole matter. I think, you know, why hasn't the government sat up and listened? Well, because I think they can pick people off, you know, and until we have a national strategy with the nation behind us, I don't think we'll shift the dial really. We'll shift it a little bit, but we won't make it really matter. And that's why when people talk about, oh, well, we've been to visit Denmark or we've been to visit Sweden or wherever it is, what they fail to ask, they go and they look at the operational, you know, and the funding of the provision there. What they fail to recognize is that this is an integrated part of society. There isn't an issue where you say, well, you know, oh, which nursery are you going to choose? You go because it's the local nursery and it's guaranteed to be good quality and it's affordable. It's not like a pick and choose thing or a competitive thing. And that's partly because we operate within a markets, and the markets can do some things to help, but unless they're supported, markets never help poverty.
That nicely picks up on another question we have, which is exactly those words. How do we make the government sit up and listen to us after so many years of neglect? Norma, how can we get them to hear the needs of the early years sector?
Well, I think you have to come together. For years and years and years, there's been this kind of division. And as you said, Mark, there's a pecking order, isn't there? We know who's on the top and we know who's on the bottom, and it's not changed for 50 or 60 years. It has to change. Maybe it's June who has to lead this change. It has to be somebody. It really has to be somebody. Maybe it's 2 or 3 people on this panel could come together with the support of something like your journal to say we need a national policy. We've not had a national policy all of my lifetime. At saying that there's always this kind of pick and mix, but the things you pick and mix aren't necessarily equal quality either. So we need leadership. We need to find people maybe from different parts of the service who will at long last come together, not just an early years, you know, somebody's doing the daycare trust or childcare trust or whatever. We need to have something like you pointed out, June, in those Nordic countries, there is a national policy, which all the tiny bits are part of this wider framework. Why we've failed to adopt this framework, with all the efforts of people who've been pushing that we should be doing this for years and years, I think it's got something to do with fundamental British attitudes to children. And I think it's got something to do with our age-old class structure. Children are not a primary of primary importance. They're people who can be put to one side, taken away and put into the quote older nursery or sent to boarding schools, etc., and disappeared from sight until they're ready to go to something called school, in which case they're disappeared from sight again because they go to a boarding school. And people are trying to do something with all the knowledge we've acquired over the years about what is really important in the early years and the development of children and our future members of society, just been basically ignored. It's convenient basically to pick you all off, isn't it, one by one? But it's time then to actually rout the old enemy, and that's the government, I think, and actually come together and say, look, we are all equally important here, and we need to have this policy. And for this, and with there are plenty of examples out there for a fair amount of cutting, sticking and pasting to go on without new innovative ideas. There's no need to fight over those. The evidence has been there for years and years now. The practicality of it has been there in those Nordic countries for years and years. So please come together. You parallel streams, as it were. Please use the power of the press behind you to say this is what we all need. And it's not just for children. I think children are probably the most important people in the world, but it's also for parents and grandparents, because we are faced with an economy where parents do have to go out to work just to feed their children. And in order for that to happen, we have to have something much more fundamental and much more robust than we've got at the moment. Not only because it's very hard to find out where the quality lies, but because there is this rivalry between the services. When we were developing from generation to generation and trying to get older people to become contributors to schools rather than users of them and share that space, which is a common communal space, is it not? And just in the way some of the childcare facilities can provide that common communal space, shared space again, we found it really difficult because of the attitudes of schools thinking that older people would be a burden rather than a major resource. So it's trying to turn that sort of thinking, and I mean in this case, all of you different early years providers coming together to force that turning around of people's thinking, so that governments don't see just parallel streams and itsy bitsy bits of provision, and parents don't have to cobble it together, because many parents are cobbling it together. Some of it may be for the good of the child, but very often it has to be in a more longer term sense for the good of the child, because the parents need to be out there earning the money that will enable the child to carry on and get at least some nurture from their families. And that's so coming together, please, is what I would recommend. And that way you can confront the government with a coherent policy, with a coherent statement of the importance of early years provision for both parents and for children, I think. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely, thank you. I have another kind of more of a comment here, but I'd quite like to kind of move it into a question for you, Owen. I think the comment from Lydia is the starting point for early education and childcare policy should be, what do babies and young children need to ensure their optimum development? Research indicates that infant care relationships that provide appropriately responsive, loving care are key. I wonder if there's a kind of a fundamental injustice in earlier settings, as they stand, that some of the most disadvantaged children who benefit most from high quality childcare are also the ones who have the least access to it, as we've kind of touched on. Is that kind of the
I mean, absolutely, and sadly for those of us who are kind of working across this sector, not only in the early years but across other sectors of society that face structural inequality and disadvantage, you see the patterns that are laid bare for the youngest in our society who are born and grow in those places, that we're sold this myth that, you know, these working class children made good and have made, you know, successes of themselves. We see the, you know, the 0.5 or 1.2% of people from those backgrounds who make it to some sort of celebrity status in society, and that trope is paraded around in the media as evidence as to why we don't need to change our system and make a more universally accessible provision for us all, as our colleagues have made clear. But we see time and time again with the boys and young men we work with later on in their life course, whether that's be transitioning from primary to secondary school, whether that's be, you know, at risk of poorer social relationships, poorer dynamics within their own familial settings. We see remedially services, and it's costing us all a fortune, by the way, trying to make up for the lack of equality start to life, whether that be through nursery provision, whether that be through good support for their parents, better education around, as someone said here, parents needing to understand the needs of their children in those early years. When we do our antenatal work and support fathers in the early years, we spend ages not reinventing the wheel, but translating messages that have been researched and known about for many, many years about a child's developmental requirements, about the importance of bonding and about the importance of attachment, around the different skills and qualities different parents may bring, and highlighting the strengths that dads may have, even if they feel insecure and have maybe been told or shown a model that maybe this isn't your space, this is an area where you're comfortable. I can recall simplistic conversations with men about being confident in touching and holding their baby, where they felt disempowered to do that because when they were young, they didn't benefit from play around children and around childcare. And that maintains the status quo of keeping those from the most disadvantaged communities where break away from the models of masculinity that are traditional could be risky, could bring about ridicule or even harm to you. We're not setting the bar high enough. We're not saying for a modern 21st century society, this is what we all want and require. We're not listening to people, parents, when they're saying that, because as I said earlier on, this is what our parents are saying they want. Once you've built a relationship with them and they feel that they can open up to you and be safe, they all want to play a role. They all want to understand what's best for their children. We've done numerous surveys at primary school gates asking parents, what do you want? What do you rate as the most important thing for your children? I want them to achieve. I want them to have better opportunities than I had in my life. And if you can explain in a 10-minute conversation, as we do, that actually investing and being interested in what your child needs in the early years, 0 to 5, will actually improve their life course chances for the next 18 years, everyone goes, sign me up. So why aren't we doing more of that? You know, and we have to, as Norma said, we have to encourage allyship as well. We have to break out of our silos. We have to break out of our own kind of personal interests. You know, I look at it from a social justice point of view and may look at certain people in government now and think, well, they'll never get on board with this because it doesn't align with their political goals or interests of free market economies and all the rest of it. However, there are masses of people out there, whether it be the London School of LSE, London School of Economics, attached to the early years foundation of the Princess of Wales, as she is now, who are apolitical organisations, but are laying out really well-researched economic cases why we need to support both parents and the early years sector for generations to come. So it's not an argument that those in power don't know about. I was interestingly invited to somewhere in Westminster this week to talk about policies moving forward for the early years and sectors. And actually the question that was posed was, we in government often talk about outcomes for children, but we don't want to tell parents how they should parent. I think, how can you not connect the two? There's a fundamental disconnect there, where, as Norma relates to, it's back to class, and government don't want to be seen to be interfering in the family. But because of things like the Children Act, that we all have been kind of, have to be held to for many, many years, and rightly so, we are interested in outcomes for children, but we don't want to support people to improve them in the way that we should. So this should be a social justice issue, and it shouldn't just be for the poor and the most marginalised in society. As June said, it affects us all. You know, we all have to pay higher taxes whether we've got children or not to deal with the outcomes of people who have had a poor start to life. So let's start tackling this now. Let's get men on board. When we're doing more antenatal work with men to get them more interested in playing a more active role as they want to, most of them in the lives of their children, let's make sure that they understand the transition isn't just for the first 6 months or 9 months while your partner's on paternity leave or whilst you're negotiating the new, not adequate enough, but shared parental leave that is available, which is better than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Be involved in the nursery decisions about your children. Be involved in deciding what your working patterns are going to be like so that you can both have a better chance of not only meeting your financial requirements, but the requirements of your children moving
forward. Thank you. We've got a couple of comments and questions coming in from parents and employees at LEYF. One of whom says they totally agree with Sean that nursery is the best place for a child because it provides routine and structure to a child's day, including mealtime, indoor and outdoor activities, and that helps children to feel confident and secure and prepare them for the future. And I think that that kind of really goes back to that idea of kind of quality childcare and what that looks like. But also there's been people flagging kind of how to make that affordable and accessible for parents, and that LEYF is apparently increasing their discount to 70%. I wonder if potentially, oh, June's disappeared, but Sean, could you maybe talk a little bit about what that means to you, and maybe June, if you want to kind of jump in on those decisions and what has kind of informed those, that would be brilliant.
So for me, it's going to mean that I can put Harry into nursery for 3 days instead of 2, in which means I can then dedicate more time here. But also, you know, I've seen how much he's benefited from 2 days. So why wouldn't I want to put him in for 3 days? Because it has just, you know, made him into a completely different person. And it, you know, he's only 18 months, but in little over a month, he seems to have, you know, grown this big personality. He is his own person now, and I feel like that's really been nurtured by the staff, you know, because they do just know him so well. You know, I have really good quality conversations with his teachers every time I collect him, and with Parent Zone, you know, I know what he gets up to during the day, but to have that debrief at the end of the day, to know that he's had such a good days, and what he's developed, and how then me and his dad can then help him, or, you know, at the times that he's not at nursery. You know, his dad doesn't get to spend all that much time with him, but he wants to be so actively involved. When we get the odd tasks, I'll often, if it's his weekend, I often send them to him and say, this is what the nursery has said that Harry's interested in. Do you think you could do activities with him this weekend that, you know, can enhance that? He does them, and, you know, he's seen, you know, vast improvements as well. But with this 70%, you know, the cost of living, you know, is affecting everyone, you know, myself included. Times are hard, but to know that my company are supporting me, you know, with that 70%, you know, it honestly, when I found out, I was so, you know, I was chuffed, honestly, because it is just going to massively, you know, give me that help that I need.
And sorry, a couple of people are commenting. Many people like June are doing a great job of pulling people together to raise awareness and create movement. However, we still find ourselves in the same position. These are more questions about how we get people to listen, how we get people to hear about the kind of importance and significance of the early years. There's also a comment, we have to start from our direct line, which is to ensure all parents see us professionally as teachers, not child carers. Often parents still see us as daycare and not serious educators. Is there kind of something about kind of getting parents not to see sometimes nursery as a kind of necessary evil almost, I suppose, that there's some kind of disconnect in the understanding of parents seeing nurseries as something which can bring out the best in the child rather than a second choice after being home, kind of thing. June.
I'm going to pick up on a couple of things here, if you don't mind. But I noticed when Sean was speaking, now it's true, she has just started working for LEYF, so she's already getting some of our language, but she's talked about teachers. And in 2017, I stopped all nonsense about practitioners and educators, and we just changed the name to teachers. And I asked the staff what they wanted. We looked at what parents call you, and you just heard a parent here who, who's just started with us, automatically use the language of teachers. And when you ask the children, and which we did, they also talking about their teachers. And we've confused what is expected of the staff to do, i.e. to teach and be pedagogical leaders and understand the art, craft and science of early years teaching, with qualifications. So it's a bit like going on a dating Tinder, right? You are, you describe yourself as, hello, my name is June and I'm a level 3. Like this is just a nonsense, and all it does is actually confuse people, but also it doesn't give credibility, and it allows for the thing Mark was talking about, that kind of pecking order. So we're not as good because we're not working in a school. Doesn't matter if a child is 3 and they're in a nursery, or a child is 3 and they're in a nursery class, or a child is 3 and they're with a childminder. We should have a baseline. And in terms of optimism, when I started doing this, getting involved in this 100 years ago, actually what we do, and the historians among us, and I think probably Norma is probably part of that, the historians among us will remember that actually in the early 1900s, there was a world of interesting, mostly women, but taking on the world of early years and creating a history around it. And then it's kind of weakened and almost got lost in the history. And there are some bits left over, like the maintained nursery schools. They all came from that big, huge campaign. And when we get really depressed, sometimes I go back to the kind of minutes of meetings where you had people like Margaret Horn, where you had people like Octavia Hill, where you had people who were change agents, having the same ding dong with the politicians then that we do now. So I think it's helpful to know that there was then a debate that then was taken seriously. So there is a history that we need to understand of our own world and our own work and our own approach that actually has improved. And, in fairness, when we did have a national strategy in 1997 to 2007, there was a shift in people's thinking, and the EYFS has actually helped people to create a framework that makes people think. So the language of pedagogy, the language of teacher, the arts, craft and science of early years is becoming much more of a national narrative. And change takes time. And so I think just in terms of, could we do more? Of course we can do more. Can we do more? We can do more when we pull together. Of course we need to do that. When my daughter was 4 and I first got involved in this world, I took her with me and we marched in the streets about the voucher system. And that was when John Major was the Prime Minister. And, at that point, nobody even knew what a 4-year-old was about. No one knew what a voucher was. There was a whole new world coming in. And I remember advising schools as to why you need the biggest space for your smallest children, because they need the most room. So we have come a long way, and our narrative is much stronger. And we've got a consistency in the debate and the understanding that we probably wouldn't have had even 5 years ago. But we have to also be willing to change some of the language. We need to own words like pedagogy. We need to do quite a lot of work on that. And we do need to own the words of teaching. And we need to stop kind of pecking at each other because you're a level 3 and you're a level 4. When you're in a room with children for the day, you're a teacher, and teaching means care and care means teaching. And actually you're doing the best for your child, and nobody gives a damn whether you are level 2, unqualified, or level 42. Actually what they want is that, warm interactions, hugely important, kind of following children's leads, great understanding of child development and great understanding of how children learn and how you follow those interests to learn, but also how you actually extend and differentiate their learning. So I think there's something about us as a sector also professionalizing ourselves, not in a way of qualifications, but in a way of creating a professional language. So I do wonder whether something like the Princess of Wales Centre might be a kind of gold star, you know, like the Royal College of Nursing, like the BMA, whatever, because these are built on a body of specific knowledge. And I think we need to pull together our academic friends and everybody else to actually create this place where you put the gold standard stuff in there, and that we join this organization as a network, and actually we take it forward so that there is an understanding that parents can understand that actually we're not just, you know, Mrs. Molly from down the road who's kind of looks after the children like an 1810 dame school, that actually that there is a whole body of knowledge behind what we do, irrespective of our age, stage, color, class, gender, whatever, that we're all sharing that body of knowledge. And you know what's been really useful in doing that? All the work we did with men in childcare. And I do hope Mark says something about that in a minute, because when we ask men why they like to work with children, it's different to why women want to work with children, but it all adds value. When you ask the children if they even notice the difference between who they want the best in class, if you're good at football and your name is, you know, Pandora, they don't really care. If you're good at creating wonderful pieces of art and your name is Thomas, they're just as pleased. So it's just about us having this place where we put all this stuff together, and actually we take the voice of the child and put it right at the center, and then we have, you know, our own bank of knowledge that then I think should drive a Royal Foundation or whatever that actually says you guys are part of something that's special, that's knowledgeable, and your body of knowledge needs to be, you know, respected.
Mark, did you want to pick up there?
Yeah, actually, so there's 2 points I just wanted to really quickly come to. The first, and Jean summed it up really well there, about teaching and care, and actually the collaboration they have with each other. And I was a massive advocate for using the term teacher. And I think we've got other terminology, childminder. I'm not sure whether that gives the correct view of what actually somebody is doing at home. But actually, I'm also just want to pick up that I think we could definitely be falling into a pit hole here when we're talking about care, and we're almost vilifying care and making it a lower status. And I think we needed to have the conversation about early years teaching and the level of work we do to really educate and develop children. But let's not forget that care is also a really big part of teaching. Just because primary and secondary don't necessarily value it doesn't mean that they're right. So society's view of teaching might be much more about the academia, but I'm picking up a lot of stuff in early years people at the moment that are almost then dismissing care as unimportant. And let's not forget that those nurturing interactions are so important for children's development and building those neurological connections and really helping that brain to fizz. So I just want to make sure we don't fall into that habit. We need to make sure we're taking on actually what the role of a teacher is, rather than it's just teaching and not care, because the two have to go hand in hand. And then just on the men in childcare stuff, and I think back to the question about feminism, is childcare a feminist issue? It's not a female issue, but it is a feminist one.
Yeah.
There's this huge level of discrimination. There's this huge level of societal view of women that is still there, this full view of sexism. And when we did all the men in childcare stuff, actually what we noticed was that the reason that men are discriminated against in early years is because of feminism. It's because of the view that we have that caring for children is women's work and low qualified. It all comes back to actually the way in which we view women. A couple of years ago, I set up a nursery group for the film industry, and it was to support women in work, because women were pouring out of the industry. They had the tiniest retention rates for women, and women that weren't having children because they weren't allowed to, outrightly discriminating by big productions that were saying, if you have a baby, you can forget coming to work with me. And actually what that unpicked, and the stories I heard, some horror stories about the way that they were treated simply because they were female, and that the view of a man being involved in the childcare, it's not your problem. If you're a husband, don't care about it. If you're a father, it shouldn't matter. So therefore women were sidelined and pushed out, and men were promoted. So actually the issues with family. So I think we have a big issue to talk about feminism, and actually the need for us all to be feminists and to champion this, because it's part of a much wider issue. If we look at men in childcare, if we look at the view of low skilled workforce, it all comes back to that really big central point of feminism. And I'll try and be quiet now, or I'll go on for a little while.
No, thank you very, very much. I'm conscious, I spoke to June earlier today about this, and she said an hour and a half will go so quickly, Meredith, you won't you'll be amazed. It feels like ages, and then it suddenly goes, and I'm very very much discovering that to be the case. I feel that we should draw this towards a close, although I feel there's a lot more to be talked about. So please do, certainly if we haven't got to your question, and if you have any more thoughts, I direct you again to at June O'Sullivan on Twitter following this. Please do keep the conversation going if you have things to add. Thank you all for a thought-provoking discussion. What I'd like to do though is just to ask all of you maybe to give a couple of words briefly, if possible. If you had a magic wand and you could do one thing to improve childcare provision in the country, what would you do, and why? As someone I've noticed in the comments has suggested an early years sector union, specifically for the needs of the early years. Do you have any ideas? I'll go through in the same order. So Owen, if you want to kick us off on this.
Gosh, I think primarily to answer that question about a magic wand, I agree with the points about heightening the status of the education in the early years and not seeing it as separate or pre-education, which is, preschool alliance have changed their name recently to the early years alliance, because it kind of indicates that preschool is somehow separate and less valuable and less worthy. And language is so important in this day and age. So the more we educate the public about the importance of early years, the more we normalize the understanding of your child's developmental needs from birth through to 3, 4, 5 years old, the better the sexual people will start to then value it. It's a generational change. So that's the one thing I would do. But I would also, just to add, because I didn't answer this point earlier on, is point out the importance of grandparents within this sector and valuing non-formal care as well. For someone who supports fathers a lot, the relationship between a child and their paternal grandparents is sometimes really essential to maintaining that child's understanding of self, where they are, and parents and the two sides of a child's family, where possible, coming together to work together. Sometimes when mum and dad might be struggling is really important, and can be a real bridge. So the early years is really important for loads of reasons. And from personal experience, I've got 3 girls now. One's a long time out of nursery, but 2 that have gone to the same nursery locally, which is not the most shiny building. They haven't got the best kind of digital payment methods or whatever, but what I do know and trust is that the staff there talk to me, value me and the children's mum. They keep us really well informed about our children's progress and outcomes. And the space there is really representative of the community we live in. There are men, there are women, there are black, there are white, there are Asian staff. I think that's what we all need to be striving for in terms of excellence, as well as gold staff. It's really important. Make this a humane and a human sector.
Norma, anything? What would you do?
Sorry about that. Well, when I thought about this before the debate, I thought of something that was very simple and aspirational, I suppose, and it was early years provisions, specifically nursery provision, reasons I've mentioned before, that would be free at the point of access. So there would be, but having listened to this debate, I'd just like to make a suggestion. Meredith, could you please invite, all the panelists here, but very especially, I think, June, Mark, and Owen, with Sean listening in, I think, here, right, together for, I don't mind what you do, lunch, tea, or just to look at how you could begin to bring these segmented parallel parts of this sector together, to start to bring a common language to it so that it will be valued in time, because it's been a long, long time that I've heard the same arguments, the same problems. There were moments when things seemed to be happening and were exciting, but now it's your turn, Meredith, to draw these singularly interesting and experienced and knowledgeable people together to start this process so that we do end up with a national policy that encourages something positive in the way of early years education. And teaching is a really good word. It doesn't devalue caring, because good teachers are carers as well as teachers. So I wouldn't overly worry about that. So yes, please, Meredith, that's my suggestion. That's my magic wand I would like to all.
Fantastic. The magic wand gets me lunch.
Yes, well, there you go.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, what's your thoughts? What would you change?
I'm going to be ideological, and that is to put the child back at central government decision making, and actually have someone that represents us, that represents early years specifically, rather than just the education system as a whole, and someone that really values what the child needs, and not thinking ideological. I guess us doing that ourselves first and proving there's a way to make them listen.
Thank you, June.
I guess a magic wand would mean we no longer have to have this conversation, because it's done. There is a Royal College of Early Years where the staff are properly paid. The children are, right center of all policy decisions, and every parent who wants to access a really good community nursery can do, and their grandparents are welcomed in there, and there is a complete multi-generational approach to things. Apprentices have the best experience, and it's gold star.
And Sian.
I guess, yeah, just to add on to everyone else's points, to make it, the child to be at the centre, for there to be more education, and to change the, the terminology and the language that we use, but also especially in this economy, there shouldn't be a choice of whether a parent, because it doesn't just have to be a mum or a dad, has the choice of not working because, nursery, childcare, whatever it may be, parents might not have, the distance to have the grandparent look after them. There shouldn't be this question of affordability. If I had a magic wand, there shouldn't be that, I shouldn't be, even recently I had someone say to me, well, why don't you just stop working? Because then, if you're saying nurseries are so expensive, then just don't work. Well, I can't not work. I can't rely on the benefit system. That's just not the way forward. And I should be able to have a career, and Harrison should be entitled to having a good quality early years education. Why shouldn't that? Every child should be entitled to that. So there shouldn't be that question of, well, it's this or that. And if I had a magic wand, yeah, I guess I'd eliminate all of that.
Lovely. Thank you all so much. June, I will hand back over to you, but thank you all so much for such a insightful discussion, and thank you everyone who gave their really thought-provoking and helpful questions and comments and things. Thank you all very much.
Well, before you all rush off to cook your 5-star meal, because you're all multi-talented people here, I'm just going to say thank you to Meredith for chairing this with such aplomb. And thank you for everybody who's come. And I know this is now recorded, so I think there were quite a lot of people who signed up for it who are going to be listening to this tonight with a glass of wine. So good on you. And thank you to everybody for giving your time up. Owen, Mark, Sian and Norma. And here's to another Margaret Horn.
Yeah.